The office looked exactly as he remembered it. High ceilings, glass walls, a lobby that echoed status before it echoed sound. The kind of place where posture mattered more than truth. Where you didn't speak until someone validated your right to speak. He had been here once, a lifetime ago, holding a backpack with too few connections and a folder full of ambition no one wanted to read. Back then, they hadn't said no directly. They said, maybe later. They said, circle back when you've got more traction. They said, prove yourself first. But what they meant was, we don't believe in people who don't already have permission. He had walked out quietly, didn't slam the door, didn't try to convince them. He didn't ask why they hadn't read his pitch, or why they glanced at his shoes before his deck. He had already learned. Some doors weren't locked. They just didn't open for people like him. So he built elsewhere. Not with funding. With time. With nights that stretched into mornings. With code written between shifts. With calls made in borrowed rooms, in secondhand suits. In spaces that didn't echo but absorbed every sound and never gave it back. He built a product. Then another. Then a platform. Customers didn't care where he went to school. They cared that it worked. That it didn't break. That someone on the other end responded like a human being. Not a help bot. He grew without noise. No tech crunch. No panels. Just momentum. Quiet, compounding, real. Years passed. The companies that once told him to prove himself started to flinch. They copied his features. Filed trademarks that overlapped. Asked his clients to reconsider. They sent him emails cloaked in compliments and veiled as competition. He didn't answer. He kept building. Until one day he didn't need to build anymore. He had built enough. And they had built a cliff. Now they needed someone to buy them time. He didn't hesitate. He bought their time. All of it. And now, standing in that same lobby, no longer holding a folder, but holding the entire company in signature ink, he didn't need to announce who he was. Because silence, when earned, becomes power. And power doesn't ask for a seat. Takes the table. He didn't call ahead. He didn't schedule a walkthrough. He simply arrived the way real change always does, without warning. The front desk recognized his name only when the scanner flashed green. The receptionist glanced at her screen twice, confused, unsure whether to stand or call someone. He smiled gently, nodded once, and stepped into the building he now owned, though they hadn't yet felt it. Upstairs, the board was preparing for another crisis meeting. Numbers had shifted again downward. Competition was bleeding their user base. Retention had collapsed. The product roadmap had become a graveyard of postponed features and half-fulfilled promises. Funding was thinning. They were days away from another round of layoffs, and their confidence was wearing a mask made of buzzwords. They didn't know he was coming. They were still drafting cold emails to firms he had already outperformed. They didn't know their signatures would no longer matter after today. He walked through the corridor slowly, taking in the glass that had once reflected him back like a stranger. Now, it reflected a man who had already built the solution they had been failing to create for years. One of the junior associates saw him first. She blinked, didn't know what to say, then whispered to her colleague, "Is that?" He stepped into the main conference room as if it were his own home. Because it was. The men in suits looked up. First confusion, then recognition, then discomfort. He took the seat at the end of the table, the one usually reserved for the partner with the loudest voice. No one moved to stop him. The CFO cleared his throat, asked cautiously, "Can we help you?" Andre didn't speak right away. He placed a folder on the table, opened it. Slide 1, signed acquisition documents. Slide 2, a simple statement. This company is now under new ownership. The room froze, then the laughter came, nervous, light, as if it had to fill the silence before reality took over. One of them leaned forward. The same man who had once told him he wasn't ready, that he needed to go out and prove himself. He said, "I remember you. You were that kid? What was it? A deck about logistics software, right? You wanted feedback." Andre nodded once. "You gave it. I listened." Another executive tried to recover. "This is unexpected. We didn't realize you were in acquisition mode." "I wasn't," he said. "Until now." He watched them shift in their seats. He knew what they were thinking. That maybe it wasn't too late. That maybe they could reposition, save face, turn this into a partnership. He let them try. He let them reach for dignity. Because what came next wasn't about revenge. It was about demonstration. That sometimes the only way to change a system is to buy the one that once rejected you and leave its doors open for everyone they would have kept out. The transition was silent at first. There were no press releases. No staged photos with smiling executives shaking hands in celebration of a new era. Just signatures, dates, control. One by one, access levels were reassigned. Permissions shifted. Department heads received short emails with subject lines that simply read, "Effective immediately." Inside the building, fear settled like dust. Not loud panic. The quiet kind. The kind that follows when power enters the room with no need to explain itself. He didn't demand introductions. He already knew the names. He'd studied them for years, from the edges, from the sidelines, from outside the glass. He knew who had stopped building and started maintaining. Who had climbed without looking back. Who had failed upward and who had covered it with jargon. He also knew who had been overlooked. The woman in support who'd solved more system outages than the engineering lead. The contractor who had redesigned a broken back-end system in 2 days and never been hired full-time. The product manager who'd asked too many hard questions in meetings and was moved to special projects as punishment. He sent them messages first. Brief. Specific. Clear. "I saw what you did. We need you." He didn't hold all-hands meetings. He walked the building. Sat at desks. Listened. Asked questions like, "What would you fix if no one could stop you?" And when they answered, he said, "Then fix it." In the corner offices, resistance brewed. The people who had once dismissed him now held tightly to titles that didn't protect them anymore. They whispered about due diligence and executive alignment. They scheduled meetings to discuss tone and direction. He didn't attend those meetings. He rewrote the roadmap instead. The first major change came within a week. A product launch that had been delayed 3 times was released under a new team. The bugs were gone. The UX was clean. And most importantly, users noticed. They sent feedback. Not the usual noise. Gratitude. Surprise. Relief. It was working again. He knew that wouldn't be enough for the board. He wasn't trying to impress them. He was writing a case study for everyone who had ever been told to prove themselves before being given the chance. Each day, more employees stopped by his desk. Not with questions. With ideas. Some of them had waited years for someone to ask. Now someone had. He let their ideas breathe. He didn't gate them through layers of process. He gave them deadlines and freedom in equal measure. And they delivered. Because people always do when they're finally seen. The 4th week marked a shift in tone. The people who used to ignore him now greeted him first. Their smiles were tighter, their words more rehearsed. They no longer saw him as an outsider, they saw him as gravity. Everything they'd once believed immovable was now being pulled in his direction. But Andre didn't bask in it. He didn't sit at the head of the table or deliver speeches from glass balconies. He spent most of his days in the places leadership never walked, conference rooms filled with interns, QA testing cubicles, call center rows. He took notes there. Real ones. Lists of what was broken not from a technical standpoint, but from a human one. The culture had once punished risk, disguised as professionalism. Now it was shifting into something uncomfortable but alive. The old leaders didn't know what to do with that. They still asked each other in hushed conversations if he was for real, if he had a plan, if he would scale back eventually. He heard all of it and said nothing until they forced a conversation. They requested a leadership summit, a closed-door gathering to align expectations. He said yes and arrived alone. No assistant, no deck, no agenda. They came in suits. He wore the same jacket he had worn the day they dismissed him. A quiet reminder that power doesn't need new clothes, it only needs memory. They asked where he saw the company in 5 years. He said, "Owned." They laughed. He didn't. Then he explained. Owned by its people. Owned by its customers. Owned by the builders, not the presenters. They asked if he was serious about keeping non-traditional hires in key roles. He said, "They already fixed what you broke." The room went silent. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared their throat and said, "That's not scalable." He leaned forward. "Neither is elitism." That night he sent a memo. It didn't go through HR. It wasn't formatted. It was a story. About the first time he was told to earn his seat. About the years he spent doing that with no seat in sight. About the moment he realized proving yourself means nothing in a room built to deny you. And about the fact that no one would have to do that here anymore. Because now he owned the chairs. And he wasn't asking for permission to share them. He was just making sure they'd never be stolen again. By the 5th month, the company no longer resembled the one he'd bought. It resembled the one he wished had existed when he was younger. There were no velvet ropes, no whispered tests of pedigree, no secret language of approval. There was simply work. And people doing it. Fully. Loudly. Without fear of being told they hadn't earned the right to speak. The old guard continued to orbit the periphery. Some adapted. Some left. He didn't force either choice. He simply stopped validating power that wasn't grounded in usefulness. A new team was now in charge of hiring. People who knew what it felt like to be on the other side of rejection. The resume filter was gone. Portfolios were reviewed anonymously. First interviews were done blind, voice only. And when the board asked if he was serious, he showed them the results. Efficiency had gone up. Attrition down. Customer satisfaction at an all-time high. But more than that, the walls of the building felt different. People lingered. Ideas collided. Laughter had returned. Not forced or polite, but full. He walked the halls and heard debates between people who once stayed silent. He passed rooms where former interns were now leading teams. And he smiled, not because it was done, but because it had finally begun. One day, someone asked him if he'd ever thought about selling. Not the company. His stake. His legacy. "I could make you an offer," the investor said. He shook his head. Not because he was offended, but because the question didn't land. "I already made the offer," he replied. "Years ago. They just didn't hear it." The investor didn't understand. Didn't need to. Andre didn't build for exits. He built for permanence. Not the kind etched in metal or marble. The kind written in changed trajectories, in reopened doors, in systems that remember the names they once erased. That evening, he hosted a roundtable. Not with founders. With employees. Not with PR. With janitors, with tech support, with frontline staff who never got the mic. He asked them what they feared, what they hoped, what they wanted to never see again. And he listened. Because this time, the people proving themselves weren't doing it for acceptance. They were doing it for legacy. And he was doing everything to make sure it lasted. The 6th month came and went without a celebration. No ribbon cutting. No camera crews. No headlines declaring the rebirth of a company. That wasn't the point. What Andre had built didn't need headlines. It breathed on its own now. Quiet, steady, undeniable. The office had changed in ways only those who'd been watching closely could see. The walls had less glass and more conversation. The calendars had fewer back-to-back meetings and more deep work hours. The suggestion boxes, once dusty and ignored, were overflowing with ideas, some of which had already been turned into new features, new policies, new chapters. He started arriving later. Not because he was tired. Because he trusted them now. Leadership had been rebuilt from the inside out. Not with fanfare, but with faith. The people they once overlooked were now setting the tone. And the people who once needed to be impressed were asking to be included. One afternoon, he returned to the room where it had all started, the boardroom. The same one where they had once told him to come back once he had something to show. He stood alone in the doorway for a moment, remembering, not out of sentiment, but to measure the distance. From then to now. From being told to prove himself, to writing the rules. He stepped inside and left something on the table. A binder. Inside, everything they'd asked for back then. User metrics, revenue, market data, design iterations, technical architecture. All of it. Proof. Not because he needed to give it now, but because he had given it long ago and no one had looked. On the cover of the binder was a note, handwritten. 2 words. Too late. He didn't leave it out of spite. He left it as a monument. A reminder to whoever sat in that chair next that the people you dismissed today might own everything tomorrow. The next morning, he didn't come to work. He went to the community center where he'd learned to code. Sat in the back while a new instructor explained recursion to a group of kids who were more interested in building than being told how. One of them asked how you know when you're good enough to be taken seriously. He smiled. Said, when you stop asking. and handed her a printed badge from his old company. CEO. Her eyes widened. He said, "Yours now." She laughed, thinking it was a joke. He didn't, because the future wasn't in buildings anymore. It was in people who'd stopped waiting for permission and started writing history in their own handwriting.